Okay. So, hi everyone. Okay, so before starting the session, let's wait for a few more minutes. You guys are doing well. Okay, so can someone quickly put in the comment like, am I audible or is there any noise? Okay. Okay, thank you, Rishikesh. Okay, so I guess we can start with the session, or should we wait for a minute? Okay, so let's wait for a minute. Okay, thank you, Saik. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so hi everyone. Hope you guys are doing well. Okay, so in previous sessions, we talked about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and as we talk, as I said earlier, when we are talking about the web development, there are three main aspects, which is like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So in previous three sessions, we have covered the HTML and CSS part, and in this session, we are going to cover a few of the, main important things which are essential for React.js, right? So let's get started without wasting any time. Okay, so these are the topics that we are going to cover in this session, which is JavaScript Basics, data types, functions, ES6 features, and asynchronous programming, promises, and async and await. Okay, so let's get started with our first topic, which is JavaScript Basics. Okay. Okay, so first of all, like, what is JavaScript? Okay, so JavaScript is basically a scripting slash programming language for web, which is, a dynamic and weakly typed. By dynamic, we mean it is not pre-compiled. It is dynamic, like it is, code is evaluated and executed at runtime. Okay, and the variables can change, the data type of a variable can change at any point in future. It is weakly typed because we don't have to define the data type, basically, yeah. We don't have to define the data type, and it is a weakly typed programming language which compiles at runtime. And it is executed as a part of web page in the browser or any host environment. Like by any other host environment, we mean, let's say, Node.js, which is basically a JavaScript environment, right? And in the browser, like in Chrome, there is a V8 engine, V8 JavaScript engine, and in Mozilla, we have the SpiderMonkey. So like environment is needed for the execution of JavaScript code, and it is, it is used to make web pages more dynamic. It can manipulate DOM and implement many other functionalities by making use of either the web APIs or the third-party APIs. It is used to make web pages more reactive. It is an event-driven programming language which conforms to the Ecmascript specifications. And JavaScript is a synchronous single-threaded language. Yeah, synchronous. It is not an asynchronous language. It is a synchronous single-threaded language. It has only one call stack, basically, so that like the code execution is line after line. Okay, And JavaScript is totally independent of Java. It has no relation, and it has nothing in common as well, right? Okay, so these are like a JavaScript is used to basically add more functionality in your web page by making use of third-party APIs or DOM APIs, so that user can interact much more with your web page, right? As HTML is just a markup language and CSS is just for the styling purposes, and JavaScript is for adding the functionality. Okay, so moving to the next topic, which is JavaScript data types. Okay, so yeah, actually, like it is kind of a basic session. We are going to talk about the basic things only, not getting in depth or making any sort of programs. Okay. Okay, so before data types, every programming language has variables, right? Now JavaScript has to, we can define some variables. Now the data types is like the values which we can put inside those variables. Variables are just the data containers for storing the data. Now we have the data types, primitive data type and the complex data types. Now primitive data type, by primitive data type, we mean simple data value with no additional properties, and the complex data type may have additional properties, and or methods. Okay, so in primitive data type we have string, so we can just define the string. Okay, so let me zoom out a bit. Okay, so we can just define a string by putting the double quotes or single quotes, or by making use of template literals. Okay, so let's create a playground and define few of them. And we can we can add JavaScript code in our HTML code by making use of internal and external system. Okay, so internally we can just add a script tag and put our code inside here. Okay, by externally we have to define a script tag and give it as a source, not define. Let's say we want to define the app.js, so I have to create a app.js here, so it will be included in this file. Okay. So let's open it. So let's open the console to see all the results. I guess it is visible to you all. So let's define a variable. Let username equal to, I guess. And in JavaScript, the camel case is usually preferred when we are defining a variable, the username. We can also put it as username or something like that, but it is often considered as a best practice to define it as in a Pascal case. Oh, sorry, the camel case. All right. Now this we have defined the string, right? So we can also define it as just using the single quotes, or by maybe using the backticks. All of this is a string. Okay, and similarly, like a number is any in JavaScript we only have the number data type. We can either put it in a floating point or put any decimal values. It's just a number. Similarly, for Boolean, it can have either true or false, undefined. The value is not defined initially, right? And in complex data type, we have like action properties, it can have key value pairs, basically the JSON object kind of thing. A function in JavaScript, functions are also objects. We will see that later on in the session. Okay, so these are the data types which we have in JavaScript, and we can make use of type of operator to check the data type in JavaScript. So let's define some of the data types. Okay. Let's log it. We can make use of console log to log the things in the browser. it is useful for the debugging also. So let's type of username. Similarly, we want to log the type of user age, the type of user details. Let's see what we get in the browser. Right. For the first one, we get the string because we have defined username as a string. The number for the user age because we have defined it. Let's say we put even the decimals after this, it will still be the number. And the object for the user details because we have defined key value pairs inside it. Let's say we have an array. User group, maybe teenage or adult. Let's log it. So even for the arrays, the type is object in JavaScript. All right. Okay, so let's consider a test case. Let's say we have this value. We are making use of certain operators here, like the equal operator, the addition operator. So let's say we have these two values. Let's copy it and try to execute it. Okay, so we have value 1, which is 16 plus 20 plus string. Value 2, which is 60 string plus 16 plus 20, right? Initially, we have not defined any sort of data type, like what should the variable should hold, right? So that's why it is a weakly typed language, because we are not defining any sort of, data type in stone. It can change later on. So let's log it. Okay. Okay, so I'm logging it like a object which contain these two values. So it is a better way of logging so that we don't have to like give it a name or something like that while logging. Okay, so let's hide it. Yeah. Okay, so as we see, the value 1 is 36 string. Why? Because we have like the computations are done from left to right. Yeah. So we are 16 plus 20, then we are adding the string. So the data type is changed while the code is being executed. Whereas in value 2, like first the string is concatenated with the 16. That makes it a complete string. So string 16 plus 20, string 16, 20 would be the answer. So this is the difference when we are playing with these kind of logics. So because like all the values are computed from left to right. So we have to keep in mind about that. Okay, so which screen we're talking about, the coding one or the browser one? Yes, Ritik. First my addition, then it is appended to the string. Okay, I guess it would be visible now. All right. Okay, so this is all about the data types. We are making use of the data types, like it has different kind of data types, and we can find the data type based using the type of operator. Okay, so moving further, JavaScript functions, right? So JavaScript functions are, very beautiful. Like we can make use of functions in various different ways in JavaScript. Like in other programming language, there is just a certain logic, certain declaration type for the functions. But in JavaScript, we have various different ways for that. Okay, so moving further, like JavaScripts are nothing but block of code designed to perform certain tasks. They are not executed automatically, instead executed when the invocation occurs. And the syntax is something like that: the function followed by the function name, and like the parenthesis, which can take certain arguments, the as many as arguments you want, and the code which is being executed within those curly braces. All right. And whenever a return statement is occurred, the function will stop execution and the value is returned to the caller. Okay, so let's define a function. Okay, so let's create another file. Let's hide it. We can define a function, maybe get user details. Right, we can log anything. So if we save and go to the browser, we don't see anything because we have just defined the function, not invoked it. So we can invoke it. We can see the log, getting user details, right? So this is the basic function declaration, right? Okay. Now the arrow functions. Arrow functions are interesting. Like it is introduced in ES6, Ecmascript 6, and it has a shorter syntax and it helps in overcoming issue that may occur by hoisting. Now, what is hoisting? That is a new term, right? So hoisting is just a special feature by JavaScript, which whenever JS engine is basically the environment in the browser, right? Whenever the JavaScript is being loaded into the browser, JS engine goes through the entire code, pulls out all the variables and functions which are started with where the like this. Let's say we have defined a where username. Okay, so this thing is done by the browser invisibly by it is not shown to the end users. So let's say we have defined a variable Rahul, right? And if we try to log it before declaring it, let's say what it returns or logs, it is showing undefined, but the error should be like it is not initialized or something like that. But it is showing undefined because this is due to the hosting. Okay, so if we declare it and then log it, then we can see the result. So this is just a hosting feature provided by the JavaScript, but it can create a cluster sometime. Let's say we have 1,000 lines of code and we have defined a variable at the bottom and we are using it at the top. So like as a developer, it is hard for me to find those. Then it will be really helpful for me, right? So, okay, so back to the arrow function helps in overcoming issue that may occur by the hosting. So let's take an example and see what does it mean. What does it actually mean? Okay. Okay, so I have declared this function here. Okay, and I'm using it before initializing. Let's see the response. I'm still getting the response due to hosting, right? But let's say I have 1,000 lines of code here or more, and then I have to find it, like go through line by line to check where this function is invoked. That is that is kind of difficult for me as a developer, right? Okay, so what can we do to make it like more feasible, like to throw the error? Okay, so first let's define an arrow function. Okay, so arrow function is nothing, just different kind of syntax to define a variable. Define a function as an expression. Okay, so let's define a variable const fetch user details. Okay, it is just a kind of different formation of anonymous functions, you can say that. So we are defining a parenthesis, then the curly braces. So this is the syntax of arrow functions. Okay, and let's log it. Fetching user details using arrow function. Okay, so so we are using get user details before before declaring the function, right? Now let's do it in the same way for this arrow function. Let's invoke it before defining it. Now we can see the difference here. Getting user details due to hoisting, but in arrow functions, there is an error. We cannot access fetch user details before initialization. So using the arrow function can avoid issues that are done by the hoisting. So we have to call this function, invoke this after defining the function. So this is the result, right? If we are using before initializing, then it will throw the error. Okay, so this is the difference. This is the issue that has been overcome by the arrow functions, and it also makes the syntax much shorter. So let's say we are not doing anything here, so we can just return this. So it will work in the same way as before. So if we see, the syntax is much shorter and we are still getting the same result. Even let's say we have a single parameter, we don't have to wrap it inside the the parenthesis. Instead, we can just do it this way, parameter. Okay, and we can use this parameter in this as well. Parameter. Let's say we are sending any parameter. So we can see, right? So like there are various uses that we can make use of the arrow functions. Like if you are comfortable with JavaScript, then you are going to use the arrow functions much according to the normal functions, right? So moving further. Okay, so we have the callback functions. So callback function is a function which is passed in as an argument to another function. This technique enables a function to call another function which is being sent as an argument. Now JavaScript, makes use of callbacks everywhere. So callbacks are, according to me, are the heart of JavaScript, and it is really useful in asynchronous programming and operations. Okay, so like whenever we are adding a event listener to any of the elements in Java's in HTML, for any HTML element, if we are adding a event listener, so that is working by making use of the callbacks. So let's say we have defined a click event on a certain button. So whenever the click button is clicked, the callback function is called and the code is executed. Okay, so let's define some callback functions. Okay. So let's say the set timeout. The set timeout is the function which is provided by the browser. It is not a feature of JavaScript. Okay, so let's say we want to execute some code at later point in time, maybe after 1 second. No. So maybe 1 second has passed, that's why. Right. So logging the statement after 1 second. Let's say we have another console statement. So now we see like the log is executed as soon as the script is loaded, whereas this statement is logged after the 1 second because we have set this parameter. Now this is the callback function. Like this is handed off to the browser because it is a part of asynchronous programming, and it is handed off to the browser. Browser handles it, right? Okay, so let's define a button here. Submit. We have this button. Okay, so let's say we are making use of the DOM API. Document.getElementById. Document.getElementById is basically the DOM API, which provides us this function. By making use of this, we can get this particular button and attach an event listener. Add event listener. Maybe click. Then we can define a function. Okay, so let's name it button click. Okay. Button has been clicked. Okay. Now, if we refresh it, we submit. Like we have added an event listener to this button. Now, whenever this button is clicked, now this is a callback function. Now, and this is handed off to the browser. So whenever like this event occurs, the browser pushes it into the call stack by making use of various mechanisms, the event loop and the queue, which we are not going to talk about this in this particular session because it is currently not in the scope. Okay, but you can look about the event loop, the call stack, and by the micro task queue and the event management queue. Okay, and for this problem, okay, so this is a callback function, and similarly, like we can define even like the anonymous functions. Let's say I'm not defining any sort of name here, but it will still work, right? I can even define the arrow function here, right? So we can define like any type of function, either be it like anonymous arrow function or a normal function. All right. So callbacks are really, useful when we are talking about the asynchronous programming and an operation based on the asynchronous. Okay, so we are going to talk about the asynchronous thing in the upcoming slides, which is a very important topic when we are, talking about the code which is happening when the user is interacting or doing some operations. Okay. Okay, I guess we have covered all these three things, so we can take some questions if we have. Okay, so why do we use TypeScript then? Okay, so TypeScript is built on top of JavaScript. Whenever we use TypeScript, let's say in Angular, Angular is based on TypeScript, right? So, like whenever we use TypeScript, it is it is compiled into the JavaScript so that it can be compatible on all the browsers, essentially. And the difference between ReactJS and native. Native is for the mobile and JS for the web. Okay, and for this problem, we use await for pausing the code. Yeah, like we are going to talk about the async await in the upcoming slides. Can I build the Android app with native? Yeah, definitely. Like native is especially for building the Android app with React. Yeah, using the React Native use of await async. We are going to talk about the await and async in the upcoming slides. Don't worry about that. Okay, so do we have any questions from the JavaScript functions, or shall I move to the next topic? Okay, I guess no question. Great. Okay, so Ecmascript Six Features. Okay, so Ecmascript is basically, is basically a specification which JavaScript conforms to. Okay, so it has many different features. It has many different, kind of operations we can have. But I'm going to talk about like a few of these, like for each map, spread operator, destructuring, rest operator, because these are the essentials which we require, like which we majorly use while we are, working with React. So we are going to talk about this for now. Okay, so for each and map. Okay, so for each executes a provided function once for each and every element. So let's say we have an array. Okay, and we are defining it is a kind of for loop. It is going to each and every element only once, and it does not return anything or takes any memory sort of thing. Okay, whereas maps create a new array with the result of the provided function, and map is much faster than for each, like it is according to the specifications, and if we log the time we can see it also. And map allocates memory and store returned values. Now if we have to see the features, if we have to implement it, let's create a script for that. Let's say we have a price list. Okay, so we have price list maybe 10, 20, 25, 50. It can have any values, any sort of values. Let's say if we are making adjusted price, let's say we want to adjust the price of every element. Initially it is empty. Okay, so for each, this is a syntax for each any element. The second is index, and third is the array. Like we can define like this is optional and hardly used. So just let's put it like for the reference if you want to. Okay, so first log it, like what it does. Element, index, and price. So if we see, like we have 5 elements in the array. So the indexing and the values and the complete array, right? So let's say if we want to transform, the prices adjusted accordingly based on some parameters. So adjusted price dot push, I guess, element star 1.5 right? So we are doing just the basic operations here, right? So adjusted price and the prices. So if we see like we have the adjusted prices here based on it, right? But it is like the for each does not return anything. It is just we are manipulating this, right? But if we are making use of the map operator, the map function, so similarly it takes the element, the index, and the array, which we hardly use, and we are using the arrow function here, right? So adjusted prices. In this, we don't have to put the adjusted prices here and push each and every computed the transformed value. Basically, we can even transform it to some another type. Let's say we are returning the value element star 1.5. Now if we hide it and see, right? Okay. See the similar thing, but using a different and much more efficient way. Now, if we look at this closely, now I have defined this adjust prices, but it does not throw like it does not, indicate any error sort of thing. Why? Because like the adjust prices is not defined in this code, but it does not throw any error either. Why it is? Because like whenever we don't define any like declare like either it var, var or let or const, it basically defined this variable in the global space. That's why. All right. So let's keep it, and we can even transform it. Let's say we want to transform it into an object, maybe price and maybe the index. All right. So if we see like we have an array of objects which is table of time when we are doing some complex computations as well. Okay. So moving further, we have the spread operator. Okay, so like spread operator is basically used to copy the array or object. It does not like in this the references are not copied. Instead, the addresses are copied. And why it is useful? Let's look at that. Okay, let's hide it. Okay, so let's say we have defined the prices here. Okay, so let's say we have the copied prices. Okay, so let's log it. Like instead of using spread operator, we can directly do this if you say so, right? So the result is same. However, if I manipulate anything in the prices, so let's say if I push a price here, it is also reflected in. Okay, yeah, just a second. Okay, so if we expand it, like Chrome provides as well, like the value is evaluated upon first expanding. Like if it is changed, the value will be reflected when we expand it. Okay, so if we push a value into the price, it is also being reflected into the copied prices. But let's say we want to define like we want to use the copied array for different purposes, for different kind of computation. But if we are copying the array using this particular thing, it will create a anomaly like, if we are doing some computations, right? So instead we use a spread operator, like the three dots, and it is an array, so we have to make use of the brackets. And if I do this now, so now we see like the 200 is being pushed in the prices array, and it is not being reflected into the copied array. So it kind of help when you are talking about this. Okay, so let's say if I even if I want to put something in copied array, let's say 2000. Okay. So the value is reflected only in this array, not in this array. Okay, great. Okay, so moving further. So let's talk about the destructuring. So destructuring is also a cool feature which JavaScript provides. It works from left to right, and it basically, like, let's say we have an array, okay, or we have an object. Now if we want to pull out the values, we don't want to use, like, we have an object, let's say user details. In this object we have certain keys, like let's say name, age, or something like that. We don't want to use username, user details dot name, user details dot age. We can make use of destructuring, and it is also helpful in React because the destructuring is very common in React. So we got to know about it, and we can make use of the rest operator to get all the rest values. Okay, so let's see how it works. Let's say we have user details object. Maybe we have the name, we have the age, okay, and some more things. Maybe the designation, the company. Okay. So let's say I want to use the user details somewhere. Okay, so instead of making use of user details dot name dot age dot designation dot company, we can make use of the restructuring here. So name, age, and let's say the rest. Now this is the rest operator, and we are initializing it to the user details. So what does it mean? Like, the user details has some properties, right? Now the name and age will be pulled out from this object, and all the rest of the details are assigned to this particular variable. So by making use of this, if we log it, name, age, rest, and let's find this. Now we see the age contains my age, the name contains the name, and the rest contains all the rest of the details which are in the object, right? So similarly, we can do it for array. It works from the order. Okay, great. So this rest operator is also pretty cool feature. We often use this particular thing in React. Okay. So any question from these features, or if you guys have any other features in mind? Is map equal to hash map? No. Does map creates a copy or change the original array? It creates a copy. It basically, allocates, let's, yeah, it allocates memory and store return values. It basically transforms the thing. JS is fun. Yeah, definitely. Rest is also an object here. Yeah, because, okay, so let's bring it here. Yeah, so let's say the rest is object because the type of the user details is object here. Let's say we have an array. Let's say, okay, so let's define it. No, first, second, rest. We assign it to the prices. Now we have these prices. The first index is 10, second index is 20, and rest of these properties are there, right? So if we log it, let's log it. First, second, rest. Now if we see, it pulls out from left to right. So the first value is the first index of prices array. The second is second index, and the rest of the properties are in an array because the type is array basically, right? So there's that. How to make web page layout responsive. You can check out the previous videos, like the CSS Flexbox and the CSS session which we had the last week. Okay, so let's move further. Okay, asynchronous programming. Asynchronous programming is good. It basically means that the things can run independently of the main program flow. Like traditionally, like when we are talking about the systems, computers, like every program runs for a specific time slot, and then it stops and let another program continues their execution, right? So this thing happens like very fast. So it creates an illusion of simultaneous execution, except on except on the multiprocessor machines, right? Like if you have a single processor or a single processor, right? So the things happen simultaneously. The things don't happen simultaneously. Instead, the time is allocated to each and every process. Okay. Now JavaScript is synchronous and single-threaded. It has only one call stack, and all the code is executed by making use of that call stack. Okay, and the execution happens after line, right? And like in JavaScript, let's say we have some code which is taking a certain a bit longer to execute. So like if we are like operating it directly via our main thread, so it will block the code, and the thread is will be blocked and the UI will be blocked. So like the code can't be executed. So like here comes the asynchronous code execution into the picture. Now these operations are handled by the environment, be it browser or even the Node.js, because Node.js is also a runtime JavaScript environment, right? And the browser provides a way to do it by providing a set of APIs that can handle these kind of functions. Now, as I said, like in the functions part, callbacks are the heart of asynchronous programming, used everywhere in JavaScript, not just in the DOM events. Let's say we have event listeners or some kind of listeners, crawl listeners, any kind of listeners. So not just in the in those DOM events, it is also used in timeout, HTTP calls, let's say fetch, which is provided by the browser, the local storage API. Okay, now there are certain problems that comes with the callback. We are going to talk about that first. Let's create a, okay, so we haven't really created a callback function here. Okay, so let's define a function here. Okay, okay, so let me remove this complete code. Okay, so let's create a callback, get employee ID with callback. And understand this, I'm defining a arrow code here. Okay, so let's define timeout of 1 second and then return I guess low to get a rounded number between 0 to 0 to 10. All right, so instead of returning, if I return it, it won't execute anything, but instead I have to provide a callback function here. Okay, so I'm providing a callback function which is executed after 1 second. Now that is a callback function. Let's say if I want to call, I call this. Okay, now I am defining arrow function again, and like we may get something. Let's say we are getting the ID here, right? Because like I'm computing the ID here. Okay, so let's log it. Let's see what it does. So if it's like after 1 second, the code is executed and the ID 1 is logged, right? It's, after 1 second, the ID will be logged, right? Let's say I have defined another callback function, get employee details with callback. First parameter I get ID, because to get the employee details you need an ID, right? And the second is callback, which is a function. So let's say I have defined a timeout function. Now I am returning a JSON object where ID is the ID I am receiving, the name, let's hard code it for now, and age. Okay. So if I get ID, then I'm going to get the employee details, right? So let's say I want to get the employee details with callback. Okay, so the first parameter that this function expects is the ID. So I'm sending the ID which I'm receiving from this function, and the second parameter is basically a function, a callback function, right? And I'm receiving the details here. So I don't have to like put these parentheses here. Instead, I can just get the details because that's what I'm receiving. Let's employee details. Some of the details. If we see like the first ID, then the employee details, right? So these things are happening step by step, right? Now the problem with this thing is, let's say once I get the employee details, then I want to get maybe the employee credit score or maybe some other details which is stored in separate database or in a separate schema. So if I want to get those details, I have to put another callback here, right? So that is the issue. That's the callback hell. Let's do it. Callback hell. Now nesting levels can be increased when there are a lot of callback. So it can really create a cluster, and it kind of frustrating at times, right? So if we have another callback, we can put it here, and then the nesting level will be increased, right? So it is kind of and if we have a lot of computations, it is kind of difficult to maintain, and the readability is not so good either, right? So what can we do to overcome this issue or problem? So two features that were introduced, okay, which is JavaScript promises and async and await. So first we are going to talk about the promises. Okay, so any questions from the asynchronous programming or callbacks? Yes, coder guy, too many callbacks. That is the problem. Okay, Okay, so let's talk about the promises. So promises basically, supports asynchronous programming. It, supports two properties, that is state and result. Now the state, by state we mean it can have three states, which is pending, fulfilled, and rejected. Pending is basically initially when there is no result, it has not been, no result has been received. And the fulfilled when, when the promise is successfully invoked and we have received the result successfully, be it error or something like that. But if there is some error code, like let's say 400 error to like a 401 error, or any sort of that error, it is converted into the state is switched to rejected state, and it is used to handle asynchronous actions which may result in success or failure. Okay, and when a promise is fulfilled, the result is a value, and when a promise is rejected, the result is an error object. All right, so let's see promises in action. Okay, so let's create a file here. Let's can also make use of the inline internal CSS, but we don't do that usually. It is not a good practice to add your JavaScript code in your HTML file. Okay, so so we have defined this, right? Get employee ID with callback, get employee details with callback. Instead, we can make use of promises to define that. How can we do that? So let's say I want to define a function, get employee ID, which does not take any sort of parameter, and we are like, this is the same thing. Let's say if I am creating a new promise, now the promise, we have created an instance here. Now it takes two parameters, which is resolve, reject. These two parameters are function itself. So whenever my code is resolved, so I have to call this function with the necessary data which I want to provide. And if I get the error, then I call this function. Okay. So let's say after a certain amount of time, let's say after 1 second, I want to return the same thing here. Okay. So instead of providing the callback here, I'm using the resolve here. Okay. So after 1 second, this promise is being resolved and this data is being sent. Okay. So how can I use this? You can use this by making use of the employee ID dot then. So we can make use of then, and as a result, making use of arrow function here, I'm getting the ID, right? Let's log the ID. Okay. If we see, I'm getting this ID. I can make also use of template literals here, right? The backticks and the expression which is being executed at runtime. Okay. So after a second, I'm getting the ID, which is 8, right? So like if I compare it to the callbacks, this code is a bit cleaner, right? So, and we have defined the promise in this way. We can use the alternate way. We can define this. So it basically means the same thing. We are returning this promise, right? So if we even see there, like we can see like get employee promise any, right? So let's say we have another promise, get employee details, and we are receiving the ID here, right? So we can make a promise which take two parameters, which are functions, right? So to simulate the resolve and reject behavior, we can do this. So after a second, I want to return the details, right? So let's say if my ID is, greater than 5, I want to reject, the, data. So let's say some error occurred, employee details does not exist. Otherwise, I want to resolve it. Maybe send the name as Rahul and any other details you want to. Okay. So let's say let employee details. We are sending the ID and then making use of then and getting the details in turn, right? So if we see like after a second we get the ID and the name, but this syntax is similar to somehow like callbacks, but this is not a good thing because we have a feature by using promises which is promise chaining. We can chain the promises. Okay, so how can we do that? Like as soon as this function is invoked and we get the result, we can return another promise by returning the return by using the return statement, and in return we can execute this and send the ID and then making use of then. So here we can get the details. So if we see, it will perform in the exactly same manner, but in a very efficient way and readable way. Like it is a sequential process. Like after getting the ID, I am returning the promise, that is the get employee details, and then logging the details, right? So if we see, like we are getting the ID, then the details, right? And let's do that try. Okay, so the ID is 8, which is greater than 5. So the error, like the promise has been rejected, right? Because we have implemented a logic like if the ID is greater than 5, then the error will be thrown. The promise will be rejected with this string, right? So you can handle it like by making use of promises, by chaining promises. Let's say you have two functions which needs to be executed simultaneously, or like the promise should be resolved, like all promises should be resolved, then your code should be executed, right? So you can do it like, let's say you have get employee ID. Okay, so just by making use of that, we can do that by making use of promise dot all. Okay, and we can for the first parameter is an iterable which contains an array, and we have to give it the get employee ID. Okay, so for now we are going to use this function only so that we can have better understanding, right? And we are getting the response. Okay, so let's log the response and see what we are getting here. So after a second, we can see like we get an array which is 1 and 6. So 1 is the result of this promise and the 6 is the result of this promise. Okay, so we can like put multiple promises and execute them all, right? Okay, and here's the flow diagram of promises, which is, I have taken from the developers Mozilla. And initially, the status of a promise is pending. As soon as it's fulfilled, the promise, like the status is fulfilled. And if it is rejected, the status is rejected. And if you want to, yeah, one more thing. Let's say we have this, and we want to catch the error. We have to make use of the catch block so that whenever the code is executed and if the promise has been rejected. Okay, so let's log it, and as it is an error object we can make use of this. Okay, so the id is 7. The error will be thrown according to a logic, right? So it is an error object, so we can see the error here, right? So let's say if I put this catch inside here and let's reject it, some error occurred. Let's see what is the result here. Okay, so as we can see, like first the error will be thrown, then there is an undefined. Why? Because like according to this flow, like whenever this statement is executed, we are getting the id, but in this promise the rejection has been there, right? So it has been like put inside this block, like, but there is then after the catch block, so this code is executed as well. So to make sure, like once the error has been occurred, no code should be executed, so we have to put the catch block at the end of the chain. So to make sure, like error, like if there is an error, the code is not executed any further, right? So we can see like the promise js like 31, on the 31st line we are receiving this error, right? This code is not executed because like whenever like there is an error in any of this block, it is directly went into the catch block. Okay, so I guess we are done with the promises. So if you guys have any sort of questions here. Yeah, we can make use of try and catch, which we usually use in the async and await, which we are going to talk about in a minute, I guess. Reject will throw exception. Yeah, reject, if you put a rejection in the promises, it will return an error object. Okay, great. So let's move to the async and await. Okay, so async and await, is basically a special syntax to work with promises. And as we see in promises, it is much more cleaner way according to like if we compare it with the callbacks, right? So async and await is also alternate solution, alternate way of using, like using promises, and it is easy to use and understand. And async means a function will always return promise no matter what. Like if it is returning a value, it will also be converted into a promise implicitly, basically. Now, and await is a keyword which is always used inside a async functions. If you try to use await in any other functions or generally, so it will throw an error, like it should be used inside the async functions only. And it basically, async and await makes your code execution synchronous, like the line after line. So this is the basic basic syntax we have here. Async function employee map, and we are awaiting the just a second. Yeah, we are awaiting the employee id. Then once we get the employee id, we are getting the details. So like we have this code here, right? So if we are making use of async and await, we can do it in a much more cleaner way. That is, let's copy this. We have to do it like so. So we have to find this way. So instead of like explicitly executing, we can just make use of this. So whenever the script is being loaded, this function is invoked in. So let's remove this. So let's define an arrow function. Okay. So first we are awaiting for the employee ID. Once we get the ID, let's put a log here, ID. Okay. then we are getting the details based on that ID, then we are logging both of the things. Okay, so if we refresh it, so we see like there is nothing being logged. Why? Because there must be some error, I guess. Or let's check it out. Okay. Okay. Let's put a try catch block. So like in async and await, if you want to catch the errors, you have to put the try and catch block. Okay. So console.error error. You have the employee ID, you have the employee details. Great. It is not executing. I don't know why. Okay, so let's define a normal function and see. I don't know. Basic function employee. No, I try to invoke it. Let's see. Okay, so now it is executing. So we have the error because we have put the rejection here. So let's resolve it. So we have received the ID and then there is the error, right? So why it is happening? Now if we see like we have this code using the promises, using dot then dot catch, right? Similarly, like we are making use of the async await. Now if you see like it has much more clarity if we compare it to the callbacks or even using the dot and dot then dot catch, right? So it makes our code more readable and sequential. Let's say first we get the ID, then we get the details, and then we are logging the details, right? So it also increase the readability. And as a developer, like if I am debugging, if the code is readable, the if I debug it much faster, then the productivity is also increased, right? So this is the async await, and if you are getting any error, it will be thrown into the catch block, right? So let's and false. Let's receive debug the ID and the details, right? So we are getting all the details sequentially. Once the previous function is invoked and the result is being assigned to this variable and sent to this, right? So I guess we have covered the async and await as well. Okay, so I guess we are done with all the topics here. Great, and the time is also up. So if you guys have any sort of questions, we'll be happy to have it. Abhiram. Yeah, this is the first class for the JavaScript, but in previous classes we talked about the HTML and CSS, and the upcoming sessions would be related to the ReactJS only, which is hopefully like from tomorrow. Yeah, thank you, Amit. Yes, it is very informative for me as well. Mahendra, promise all. Yeah, promise all is basically to to resolve all the promises. Whether it is rejected, then it will be thrown into the catch block. We can catch the error and process it accordingly. Can you repeat async keyword in short? Sure. Let's look at the documentation to get the async function declared with. Yes, it is visible now. Okay, so async function declared with async keyword, and async keyword, like it defines a function which will always return a promise no matter what. Let's say if we are returning even a value, it will be converted into a promise implicitly, not explicitly, then implicitly. It will definitely return a promise. Let's say we can try an example here. Okay, so we have defined this async function, right? So let's say I'm not returning here anything. Let's return the details. Okay, it will always return a promise, so we can make use of then. Okay, so let's define the arrow function here. And employee details. So if we look at the code, we still get the same details, employee details and the details here, right? So that's what it means. Like it will always return a promise no matter what. Okay, so I guess we are done with the session. So in the upcoming session, we are going to talk about the React part, uh, which is going to be, fun. So we are going to take on the React step by step. Okay. So I hope this session is productive for you guys as well as it is for me. So I guess we are done here. Okay. So guys, bye and stay safe. Okay. Bye.